is Braxton Bragg, and I'm USO's Financial Control Analyst. Today I'm going to briefly go through some of our procurement and travel and expense reporting procedures. First off, the basics. Whenever we talk about procurement, it applies to goods and supplies, equipment and furnishings, and professional services. We use a procurement authorization form, or PAF, that is required for any unbudgeted purchase over $10,000 and for any purchase over $50,000, regardless of whether it's budgeted. One important thing we'd like to know is that procurement requests should be for the full cost of a product or service. So what that means is if you have a project that involves multiple steps and/or vendors, you will only fill out one procurement request for that entire project. Also, we'd like to note that procurement should be approved prior to actually committing USO to a purchase. That means before you order the goods or sign a contract, we want you to obtain the appropriate level of approval. Finally, the competitive bidding process is actually going to differ from department to department, but finance would like to see evidence that bids are solicited from multiple vendors before a decision is made, and that's going to apply for any purchase of goods totaling greater than $100,000 or services greater than $250,000. This next slide is fairly self-explanatory, but we just wanted to inform you of the various levels of procurement authority out there. Different levels of seniority within the organization have different thresholds below which they can approve procurement forms or expense reports, and we just have those listed here. We created this flowchart to give you an idea of what the process actually looks like, and it should be a resource for you if you're going to go through the procurement process. When a purchase is necessary for a business purpose, you should first research prices and available vendors. Then, depending on the amount of the expense, you may need to complete a PAF. Some purchases may require CFO or CEO approval or competitive bidding, as I mentioned before. Additionally, any contracts potentially require review and approval by USO's legal counsel, and his name is Tony Biseglia. In these instances, probably best to just contact finance and we'll help coordinate the process. When all the required steps have been completed, any supporting documentation should be submitted to the accounts payable department or to the relevant regional accounting manager. Only at this point can you actually go out and procure the goods or services. Just a couple of brief notes about contracts. Any contract greater than $5,000 should be approved by the USO legal counsel, as I mentioned before. And for a contract with a duration of greater than 1 year, we require approval of the executive committee of the Board of Trustees. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the travel and employee business expense policy and procedures. These are almost certainly going to be applicable to everyone in the organization at some point during his or her tenure at the USO. First off, just the basic premise is that USO is going to reimburse you for necessary and reasonable travel, entertainment, and non-travel business expenses if you're conducting authorized USO business. But, however, travel must be approved by a VP or above prior to actually making a commitment. And any employees below the director level are required to complete a travel authorization form prior to making travel arrangements. This form is available on the shared drive under the B&F online folder. Alternatively, you can contact any member of finance and we will forward you the form. For air travel, coach is the authorized class of travel that USO employees use. The fare should be the lowest coach fare available for the travel dates, and also to keep costs down, we ask that you try to reserve your flight at least 3 weeks in advance. If you're going to be booking a continental US flight, you should book that through our travel agent, Travel On, and I've listed the number here on this slide. International travel may be related to a grant chargeable initiative, such as USO To Go, United Through Reading, and these typically require the use of a US carrier, if possible. Lodging. It is possible to expense lodging if you're going to be traveling in excess of 100 miles of the distance between your home and your reporting office or center. We ask that you book standard rooms only, so no converted grand ballroom or anything like that, or you're unlikely to be reimbursed. And any such receipts should be itemized. It's also possible to expense the cost of a vehicle that you'd be using on USO business. And these should be appropriately sized and only rented if the cost is expected to be lower than what you would spend on taxis, buses, rail, or other transportation. Personal automobile use for a business purpose is permitted, and we reimburse that at the current IS mileage rate, which is 50 cents per mile for 2010. Also, travel between an employee's home and reporting office is not reimbursable, so that would be your typical commute. For meals during travel, at USO we actually do not use a per diem rate. The actual costs of reasonable meals are reimbursable, however. What we give as a rough guideline is about $50 a day, and that's assuming 3 meals and tips. But however, we might see variation depending on where the travel is taking place. It is also possible from time to time to expense entertainment costs. And this could include meetings with vendors, suppliers, prospects or donors or consultants, and coordinate any such entertainment with your department. And these expenses should always directly relate to the conduct of USO business. Now I'd like to talk about expense reporting. The USO does have a number of corporate credit cards that we issue to certain employees based on their roles and responsibilities. The credit limits for these cards will vary by level. Basically, one of the primary rules we like to follow when using the BB&T Visa cards is that they actually should not be used if the USO can be billed directly for products or services. So if you are working with a vendor and they ask you whether you'd like to charge that expense or send us an invoice, always please ask them to send us an invoice. At the end of each month, anyone with a Visa card is required to submit a reconciliation form that kind of details the month's purchases. That form is also available on the BNF Online folder on the shared drive. For out-of-pocket expenses, if you don't have a Visa card and you do incur expenses with using either a personal credit card or cash, there's a form that's very similar to the Visa reconciliation. And if you submit that to the regional accounting manager or the Arlington office, then checks are typically issued on Fridays. It is possible from time to time to get travel advances. These are available to all employees, and they're issued before travel as a check made payable to the employee that requests that advance. These are submitted on a department-approved travel advance form, also available on the BNF Online folder. If you're requesting reimbursement for travel expenses, travel expense reimbursement form should be submitted within 10 days of returning from your trip. And if you did get a travel advance, you should make a check or a money order payable to the USO for any amount of that travel advance not used. Anytime you submit an out-of-pocket expense reconciliation form or Visa reconciliation form, Finance does require that you also submit supporting documentation for your expenses. And these are always supported by the original receipts for the purchase you made. If you do lose a receipt and it's under $25, it's not a huge deal, and we will just accept the reconciliation form. Receipts should always be taped to an 8.5 inch by 11 inch sheet of paper, and they should be numbered based on the appropriate entries on the cover sheet. If you are asking for mileage reimbursement, those expenses should be accompanied by printouts from Google Maps, MapQuest, or a similar service. Before making any submission, you should obtain approval from a departmental supervisor with sufficient procurement authority for the amount of the expenses for which you're requesting reimbursement. Not only should an expense list a description of your purchase, but always what the business purpose of that expense details. It should be coded and properly approved for payment no later than 5 p.m. Tuesday of each week, and Finance will process payment later that week. If there's a problem with your submission, it is possible to correct that before 12 p.m. Wednesday, and your check will still be processed that week. If you did make any purchases using foreign currency, we ask that you please convert that to US dollars and provide the conversion rate that you used. The regional accounting manager should be your first resource when you do have questions about finance policies and procedures. However, please feel free to reach out to me or another member of the finance department at any time. Have a great day.